a crib sheet here. I have on my left, I've got Judith Henderson, who's a project manager at Book Aid International. She's been at Book Aid International since April 2012.
Yeah, so quite new.
Quite new. But prior to that, Judith has lived a checkered life and worked across the world in Australia, Thailand, Nigeria, Cameroon and Namibia in a variety of roles and sectors. Then on my right, I have Stevie Russell, who's been at Book Aid full-time since May 2012, so full-time fairly recently. But before that, she previously worked as a book selector and also as a volunteer working in Book Aid originally. Prior to that, Stevie spent over 20 years working in the UK academic sector, including 12 years managing the UCL Language and Speech Science Library. And I know there's a couple of Stevie's former colleagues here as well, so thank you for joining us. So I'll let Stevie and Judith tell you more about Book Aid. The setting for the evening is we have to leave the building by 5 to 8. So Stevie and Judith can talk for as long as they like. Then we have time for questions, a bit of networking. As long as we're out by 5 to 8, and CILIP will be happy with us. Okay, over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Doug.
Thanks, Doug, and thanks very much for inviting us to speak. I'm going to just give a general overview of Book Aid and our work and history, and then I'll hand over to Judith, who will give you more details about our current and future projects, especially those with regarding children's libraries. So first of all, just to tell you a bit about Book Aid, and in fact, the reason I'm standing here talking to you today about Book Aid is because I came to an ILIG Informal a few years ago and heard somebody from Book Aid speaking, and I became a supporter of Book Aid and then a volunteer when I was working part-time, and I liked it so much I joined the charity, so you never know what might happen. So that's us, and this is Book Aid, and just to give you a little overview of the history of the organisation. We're coming up to our 60th anniversary next year. So the organisation was originally founded as the Ranfurly Library Service by Hermione, Countess of Ranfurly, who was the wife of a diplomat stationed in the Bahamas in the 1950s, and she became aware of the complete lack of educational resources, libraries, books in both the Bahamas and other countries that they were stationed in. And she had tremendous energy, and she organised collections of books from everybody she knew, from schools and libraries and individuals, and collected them all together and shipped them off to numerous countries in tea chests, great tea chests, actual old tea containers that had tea packed in them in Africa and sent here, and then they were packed full of old books and sent to Africa. All over Africa and the Middle East and the Far East and India, all sorts of countries. And in fact, in recognition of that, her daughter, we've recently donated 1,500 children's books to her daughter, who is carrying on her work in the Bahamas, and those will be going to children's schools and school libraries next year. But that's in addition to the work that we now do. This carried on for a few decades, and then in the 1990s, people became more aware of the nature of development in Africa and how it shouldn't be just about sending them all our old stuff and expecting them to be grateful. So in the 1990s, what was the Ranfurly Library Service reviewed all of its practices and decided that it would be more targeted towards what people actually needed and wanted, and focus on where the need is greatest and where we can deliver the most appropriate materials. So for a start, all of the books we're sending are in English, so we decided to focus on English-speaking countries. And also we decided to gradually stop sending so much second-hand material and focus on getting donations of brand new books from publishers. Publishers in this country have masses of overstocks which mostly get pulped, and we think we can get in there and get the books that are useful and get them to the places where books are needed. So in the 1990s we were rebranded as Book Aid International with this new focus that was more partner oriented, more about working with partners, working with organisations based in the countries, because they can tell us more than we could ever know about what the needs are and how to administer them. So that's how we operate now. We since 2007 we focus just on 13 countries. 12 of them are in Anglophone countries in sub-Saharan Africa, and we also have a small program in the occupied Palestinian territories as well, which is sort of left over from the days when we used to send books everywhere. But mostly what we'll be talking about this evening is our work in Africa. So these are the countries that we currently work in. As you can see, most of them are East Africa over here, but with a couple of anomalies over there, Cameroon in the west and Namibia down in the south. but most of the countries that we work with are East Africa and Palestine, so put this on the map there. And this is the overview of the whole organisation. We're a very small charity. We don't have massive overheads, we don't have lots of people in fancy offices. There are 20 staff based mostly in our office and warehouse in Camberwell, South London, and we own that building, so again our overheads are not huge. The teams are the programmes team, which myself and Judith form a part of. These are librarians and a member of staff who chases books from publishers, our acquisitions manager, getting all of these books in, and librarians who work with partners overseas to plan the projects and the programmes and plan where the books are going and what books are needed. And who also, my own role, my actual job title is now Collections Development Manager, and I try to organise the selection of all of the books at this end, choosing the books that are going to go to which partner and how they get there, basically is a large part of my job. We also have a small fundraising and public relations team, and we have admin staff who look after all of our finance and human resources and those kind of needs. And we also have staff, operations staff in the warehouse, because we don't just need librarians, people who know about books, we need people who can drive a forklift truck, because we get books in by the pallet load. A pallet is a big thing of about 100 boxes on it, and things like that. So we need lots of people with all sorts of different skills. And also in the warehouse, we very much depend on volunteers. This is Jean Alexander, who's one of our long-standing volunteers. She's been stamping and packing books in our warehouse for over 20 years now. And we figure that she's stamped and packed about 1 million books in that time. We do have one member of staff based in Nairobi in Kenya, James Kimani. He's our East African representative. So he works from home in a home office there, and he looks after lots of local operations in Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania. And we're looking forward to appointing a second person to be based in probably the Southern Africa next year, who will be there for at least 2 years managing projects for us. So that's the entire organisation, like 20 people. And lots of volunteers. We absolutely depend on our volunteers. A lot of the work is done by volunteers. As Doug mentions, this is how I started. We stamp every single book that leaves our warehouse, because we have to guarantee, or do our best to guarantee to our publishing donors, that those books that they give us aren't going to end up back in the market somewhere being sold. So we stamp every single book on the title page, not for resale, Book Aid International. And it helps for us to track where our books have gone, and when we go on monitoring visits, we can see the books on the shelves that we sent and that kind of thing. But the main reason is so that we can say to our publisher donors, these books aren't going to be sold. They're not going to be competing with your sales in the marketplace. And we depend on volunteers. We have a team of volunteers, some of whom would come in during the day to stamp books in the warehouse, and we also have volunteer evenings that anyone can come along to. So if anybody's got some free time and fancy a bit of book stamping, I used to love stamping books as a librarian. It's like we don't really do that anymore, so it gives you an opportunity to do book stamping, which is fun. And a bit about our partners. The way we work is that in each country we have at least one, maybe 2 or 3 major distribution partners. And they might be a National Library Service. In Kenya, Malawi, and Tanzania, we work with the National Library Services Boards. And what they do is they collect the shipments. The shipments of books could be anything up to 40,000 books and 15 pallets, but it might be just a couple of pallets, it varies country to country. And they will collect the shipment. We'll get it into the country, they'll collect it, they'll clear the customs, and they'll distribute it on to other libraries. And as well as National Library Services, we work with NGOs such as AET, the African Educational Trust. I don't know if anyone's heard of them. And we work with them in Somalia, Somaliland, South Sudan. They do all that work for us. In some regions, it's universities, Chadwell University in Uganda and a couple of university in Zambia act as distributors for us. Sometimes it's the government in Eritrea. We work with the Ministry of Education. Sometimes it's specific book distribution committees who are set up for this purpose, such as in Zimbabwe. And also we work with the British Council, because the British Council, as you know, used to have libraries in each country. They don't really do that anymore, but what they do is they'll distribute our books for us to libraries in that country, such as Palestine, Ethiopia. And the kind of libraries those books will end up in could be anything from a school to a university, even prisons. We work with the African Prisons Project in Uganda to get books into prison libraries. They might end up in small NGO organisations, like small organisations with a gender or development focus. Hospitals, medical schools, teacher training colleges, vocational colleges, anywhere there is a need for books and where we can supply appropriate books, these partners will distribute them for us. And we monitor our work with, as well as visits, which are sometimes undertaken by members of the programmes team. And we ask our partners at the end of each year to complete a very detailed feedback form or report form where they tell us where the books went, how well they were used, were there any that were not good for them, any whatever was a particularly good one. And we also ask them to complete their requirements for the following year. So we ask them in quite a lot of detail what type of books they want, what sort of quantities, what sort of reading level, subjects, all of that kind of thing. So that's one of the ways we monitor our work. The other type of partner that we work with, as well as our large distribution partners in each country, we have a number of partners that are smaller organisations for whom we select books in our warehouse in Canada. So we've got a team, myself, I'm a librarian and I have 2 members of staff who will, what we do is when we get the books from publishers, we shelve them according to their category. It's not as neatly as in the library, but and then we will look at the partners' forms when we're planning a shipment. At the moment, we're planning the next shipment to Zimbabwe, so we know which partners are on that shipment, and we look at their forms, and we go to the shelves, and we select books that match their requirements. And then our volunteers will pack them up and get them shipped out. We are developing an IT system for the warehouse. We don't have one at the moment, so at the moment it's all done by paper and vision, really. But it's based on us librarian skills and our knowledge of the partners that we work with. And these are examples of some of those organisations. So there might be a community library service with a number of libraries. It might be a university, a hospital, a medical school. It might be a small NGO. As I mentioned earlier, we work with APP in Uganda. Faweza is the
Forum for African Women Educationalists, and they're a regional NGO in Africa, and they have chapters in most countries. And we work with a couple in Africa, the Zambian chapter, so it's Faweza, and also the one in Uganda, which is known as Faweza.
And Faweza runs mobile libraries for school-aged children, so we send them a lot of educational material. The Wendell Trust that runs refugee camps in Kenya as well, and Dadaab and Kukuma refugee camps, we send books to them. So as I was saying, at the moment, Book Aid International staff select the books according to what they said they want. But when we have our IT system up and running next year, the plan is that our partners will, those who have the facility, will be able to log into our database and select their own books. So that's what we're ideally aiming towards, is that all of the selection is done by the librarians who need the books, which will make a lot more sense than what we do at the moment. But for those who don't have the facilities, many places we send books to, there are no computers, there's no internet, there's no electricity. So those who don't have that facility will continue to select books for them according to what they've said they want. So that's pretty much how we work. And I'll introduce you to just a few of our partners. As I was saying, our staff carry out monitoring and evaluation visits regularly. My own work is mostly based in London, but I did have a visit to Kenya and to Ethiopia earlier this year. So these are some of the people that I met. This lady was using a resource centre in a rural area of Kenya called a Marifa Centre. And we helped to set these up last year. It was a funded project that we had. Their resource centre is built in old shipping containers in the middle of a farming area, rural area. And they have books which have come from us, they have computers, and they have staff, some of whom are volunteers, who help the local community to access educational resources, books and computers. And this lady told me, well, she told James in Swahili, translated it for us, that her children have helped to pass their exams at school through using these books, and that she herself has learned to use a computer. When we went into the shipping container, she was sat there using Facebook in her Maasai robes, and she said it's changed her life. So that's one example of the type of place our books might end up in. This is Tena Kabena in Ethiopia. This is in Addis Ababa. This is a fantastic organisation. It's set up by this young law graduate. They've set up an educational training and resource centre and an urban agriculture resource, which is where they're teaching the local residents to grow food and to read, basic human needs, in what was an old rubbish dump in the middle of Ethiopia. So they've found in the middle of Addis Ababa, the city, so where the river was polluted, and it's a rapidly developing city, lots of building work going on, lots of rubbish, toxic waste dumped there. They cleaned it all up, they're growing food, they're teaching people to grow food, keep bees, grow medicinal herbs and that kind of thing, and teaching them to read and use a computer, and that's all happening in this little resource centre. And again, some of our books have ended up there through the British Council in Ethiopia. So that was quite inspirational to meet these people, some of whom had never seen a book before. And we also work in Kenya with the Mathare Youth Sports Association, or MISA, another inspirational organisation, which was set up by one very energetic individual. They provide sports facilities for children from the slums of Nairobi, but along with the sports facilities, which obviously all kids love, playing football especially, there'll be a library, and the kids can go in there and they can use the books, they can read, and they have workshops that teach them to write, and they have creative writing workshops. We met a young man who had taken part in a creative writing workshop, and as a result had got a scholarship to go and study in Norway, and he'd written and published a novel, and he'd come back to teach the kids in the MISA slums resource centres, and that was a really inspirational example. This was a sunny Saturday afternoon. You don't get many kids here going, "Oh, I want to go to the library," and the sun's shining and they can go out and play football. These libraries were full. And that week there'd been a teacher's strike in Kenya, and George, the founder, told us that the kids all flocked to the libraries when the schools were closed because they're so desperate to learn and to read. It wasn't like, "Hey, we've got a day off." It was like, "Hey, we can go to the library," which was pretty moving stuff. So where does our funds come from? This is something that people always want to ask, as you should. We don't get any government funding at all. Okay, we used to get money from DFID, but we don't anymore. So it all comes from voluntary contributions. About 1/3 of it is from organisations, corporate donors, charities, NGOs, and some of that funding will be targeted for specific projects. So if we have a project, and Judith will talk more about this shortly, we might ask for a donor or try to find a donor, or a donor would approach us and say, "I want to help libraries in Uganda." We'll say, "Great, we want to do this, can you give us money?" So some of it will be tied to projects, some of it will be just money that's given to us for our general work. But 2/3 of it comes from people like you. 2/3 of our income comes from individual donors and community fundraisers. So people who sign up to our reverse book club, which is where you give us money every month and you don't get any books. And I've got some books over there, so please help yourselves at the end of the talk. We get a lot of money through that, through individuals just giving us money every month. Appeals that we put out that you've probably seen at Christmas and so on. Legacies that people leave us in their will. And community fundraisers, schools hold special events for us on World Book Day, and bake for books and things like that, and book sales to raise money for us. And also we have people who run marathons and half marathons to raise money for us. So it all comes just from individuals, which is fantastic. So the books, what about the books we send? We send every kind of book, from a children's picture book all the way up to a postgraduate textbook, every level of reading. They're all in English, they're all from UK publishers. They're all brand new. They're all donated either by the publisher or booksellers. We get returns from bookshops. So when I say brand new, I mean unused. I mean, some of them have been sitting on the shop shelf, but they're all new, they're not second-hand, they're all in good condition. As I say, we have a member of staff whose job it is to acquire book donations for us, and she does a very good job. So we get at least 500,000 books a year. And where we get funding for a project, the sort of thing I just mentioned, we will use some of that to buy books locally. So where there is a local publishing industry, we will buy books in the local language. For instance, in Kenya, we would buy books in Swahili. And they will be targeted to certain projects. So there might be health books, there might be books in areas that we rarely get donations of, but there is a huge demand. For instance, books about HIV and AIDS, there's a huge demand for those. We can rarely source donations of those. Also, a lot of vocational skills books, books about hairdressing, building, plumbing, carpentry, those kind of books there's a huge demand for, and we can't often get them donations. So if we have a pot of money from one of our donors, that's what we'd use it for. We'll say, great, we can buy these books for this project or to meet this need. Our aim is to send at least 500,000 books a year. Last year we sent 548,000. This year to date we've sent nearly 400,000, so we're pretty much on target to meet that again this year, we hope. So those are the books. I've got a few breakdown of quantities for you. So it varies country to country how many we send. This depends on what our relationship is with partners in the country, what the infrastructure is like, how much they can cope with. So the most books we sent last year was to Uganda, and that would have been 4 separate shipments to Uganda. Whereas Puntland in Somalia, only got the one shipment of 9,000 because that's quite a small program at the moment. But they all start small, so you never know. So that gives you an idea of the quantities we sent. Work. And these are the subject areas broken down. So you can see from here, I don't know if you can see actually, but the pink and purple columns there, the most books that we sent were children's and teenagers, leisure reading, storybooks and so on, and primary school age educational books, which, to be honest, are mostly not textbooks. They're quite hard to come by and they often don't match the requirements of the curriculum in country. So our primary school books tend to be graded English readers, that kind of thing. But we sent 177,000 primary age educational books, 115,000 children's. And the rest, as you can see, 93,000 secondary books, higher education 40,000, nearly medicine 29,000, and gradually we also send leisure reading. We don't send very much law. It's difficult to find law books that are relevant for the countries, but we send some. And the one category where we can never ever get enough books is reference. Things like dictionaries, encyclopedias, atlases. They're not printed in huge numbers here anymore because people are more used to using that kind of resource online. But a lot of the countries we send to, they're not, and they don't have the resources to do that. So we're desperate for printed dictionaries, encyclopedias, and so on. We're even considering, for the first time in many years, we might even consider second-hand dictionaries because so many people are getting rid of the dictionaries now because they have it online, whereas we could really use them with very good condition. So we might make an exception for those. But that's the kind of breakdown of the subjects of books that we send. But what Judith's going to show you now, who's going to talk to you more about the project, is the next slide after this one. Yeah. There we go. So I've told you all about the books and the partners that we work with, but our work isn't just about sending books, because although we say quite rightly books change lives, a book in itself is really just an object. You have to know what to do with it, you have to have access to it, you have to know it's there for it to actually change your life and be of any use to you. So we do more than just sending books and assuming that they're going to be used and they're going to be useful. We work with librarians, we train librarians, we refurbish facilities so that they're attractive to the local community, especially children, so that people know about these resources and come and use them. So some of the ways that we do this, we had a project called Health Information Hubs in Kenya. Over the last 3 years, 2010 to 2013, we put these health hubs into 15 libraries in Kenya. We provided 500 medical books from our donated stock to these hubs, and we also purchased some books in the local language. For example, I don't know if anyone's familiar with Heinemann's series called Jaws, Junior African Writers Series, which are specifically targeted for the East African market, and they're children's picture books, storybooks, and some of them are about issues such as HIV and AIDS. So we bought a lot of these as well, but a lot of it varied everything from promotional public health to academic textbooks like Kumar and Clark's Clinical Medicine. So that there's a health resource in each of these libraries for members of the public to use, for students, for doctors, nurses, health professionals, anyone to come and use. And we also trained some of the librarians in the use of health resources. So as well as providing the materials, two librarians in each library were given training on how to use electronic resources in health and whatever other health resources are available. Our East African representative, James, is an expert in health libraries, so he was able to do that for us. And the Children's Corners, which is more what we're going to be talking about today, this began in 2009 with 6 libraries in Kenya and Tanzania. And what we do, we work with the National Library Services, and with funding that we get from our donors, we will give them a grant to refurbish the premises, because a lot of these libraries, where they do exist, are very run down, and they don't have decent conditions to they don't have chairs, some of them, so people are sitting on the ground. So we create a welcoming space for children to come to, that they'll, because they might not have ever seen a book in their lives, they don't know what the library's for. But if you create a space that's welcoming and colourful and lively, they'll come, they will come. And the librarians are trained in how to make the libraries attractive to children and how to have story times and that kind of thing. And now we've got a typo. Oh, is it 46
No, I
now?
changed
Oh,
it.
fantastic.
It's
I've
actually
noticed it, so it's typo. 46 libraries in Kenya, Tanzania, and Namibia. Namibia, yeah. And now taking part in this Children's Corners project. So on that note, I'm going to hand you over to Judith and tell you more about Children's Corners.
Yeah, so as Stevie said, we've had success. We now actually have worked with 12 libraries each in Kenya and Tanzania. I don't have a map for you, and they're scattered all around the country, both countries. Some in quite hard to reach areas. I don't know if you're familiar with Kenya, but we've got some libraries up on the border with Somalia, the places near the Lake Kisumu. Tanzania, they're spread out Kilimanjaro, near Dar es Salaam, all over these countries. My particular area of interest is Uganda, and I'll come on to that. Just some little facts for you about our books for children. We actually shipped in 2012 about 386,960 books, which is about 70% of our total shipments were books for children and teenagers. That's that primary textbooks, picture books, chapter books, and secondary textbooks. And we did some little bit of data crunching, and about 135,146, we think, there could be more because we had insufficient data, went to primary and secondary schools in all of those countries, 12, 13 countries. So seems like big numbers, but when you think of the thousands and thousands of schools that there are in just our 13 countries, you realise that it's kind of small fry, really. However, we're working on that. And working on the Children's Corners has been a real way to support the libraries and the children with access to books. So yeah, from 2009, we've actually 30 so far, Kenya, Tanzania and Uganda. This is one in Soroti, which is up in the eastern part of Uganda. I visited it just fairly recently. And all of those libraries, they're now brightly painted. A lot of them have got murals on the walls, they've got alphabets, they've got numbers, they've got the right size furniture, chairs that the children can sit on, tables they can sit at. They've got the right sort of shelves. So many libraries you go into in the children's section, the shelves are kind of up here and kids can't reach. They're behind glass cabinets, they're behind wire mesh, really not accessible to children. And we've sent over, I think each library was getting between 500 and 1,000 books for their collection. Mostly picture books, chapter books, and as Stevie mentioned, part of the grant is also for the libraries to buy local books. In most African countries, early childhood education is done in mother tongue, and perhaps there are more experts than me around about this, but children learn to read much more easily if they're learning in a language that they're familiar with. It could be their home language. It could be the language that they hear around them, which isn't necessarily the same. But it has shown time and again that children do much better, and even when they transition to learning in English, which most schools will introduce later on in primary school, they will do better at learning English and reading in English if they've been exposed to their own language. The big problem is materials and resources in those languages. Publishing industry in a lot of African countries doesn't have a huge market, there's not a lot of money. People become quite creative, making their own books. You'll find, and we've suggested it, so in Soroti, the language there's not much material written in Tezo. What do? Get a big book that's got very simple sentences, cover it up, and translate it into the language that the children know, and get them familiar with the story, familiarise yourself with the story, get them familiar with the story, and build it up that way. And people do become quite creative when it comes to creating, and making their own resources. And that's a key feature of our programs, is supporting that local language acquisition so that the books we're providing, when they're ready to read them, are just much more useful. What do the librarians say about our program? One of the major things that we've offered is training. So many librarians and library staff that I've met on my travels, they may have done a diploma, a certificate, or even a degree in librarianship, but they're very traditional. It's all cataloguing, classification. very little about reader development, user services, working with children. And that's something that we brought into the programme and have introduced to librarians is you're faced suddenly with 60 children, they've come in on a Saturday morning, what do you do? I mean, I've had that. I started working in a school a few years ago. I hadn't a clue how to manage a bunch of overactive 5-year-olds. And it's no different in a library in Africa where you've got 3 times as many children. So part of the training is how you can manage large groups of kids, what activities will they respond to, reading stories, telling stories, getting the children to sing songs, do rhymes, do arts and crafts. And the impact it's had on the librarians has been quite amazing. The impact it's had on the children has also been quite amazing. So what have the librarians said about our various projects? Mwanza is a big town in Tanzania. And the librarian said, Mwanza can be a dangerous town for children, especially at the weekend when they could be in danger of getting into trouble. But the Children's Corner at the public library provides a safe space for children to go, and they really enjoy reading the books. The most exciting activities in the project libraries is the new, much younger users and parents who started using the corners as a result of the new games, furniture, interesting books and programmes that come with the project. Soroti, the library I showed you just now in eastern Uganda, is right opposite a big primary school, but they didn't have a particularly well-organised section for children, just a few shelves scattered in amongst the adult library. They changed the library round, put the children's corner in a room, and then suddenly painted it, put books in, there were fans, it was nice and cool, and a few games, some bricks, some kind of Lego type things. A few children from across the way came over. Within 2 weeks, word had spread, so they were inundated with children just coming in. They'd heard from their friends, oh, there's books to read, we can come in at lunchtime, we can come in after school. And that's what, when I went there at lunchtime, the place was heaving, there were children everywhere, reading books, playing games, reading with each other. And it's almost too successful, and other libraries have said the same. We're almost too, we don't know what to do. How do we manage this? So some training I just was co-facilitating last week. We were just encouraging people to make proper programs, plan. There's conflict with these children's corners. Some of them literally are the corner of the main library. It's becoming really noisy. The other adult users are complaining. Well, let's try and work this out. Everyone can coexist side by side, make a plan, but don't kind of build too many barriers. So they're thinking about that. And these are things they've never really thought about. They hadn't really considered who came to the library. It was just somewhere that had a few books, people came in, they sat, they went home again in the evening. Now these places are just hives of activity, and it's not just the children coming, the parents are beginning to come. Where does my child go on a Saturday? What are they doing? Is this safe? What are they doing? They'll come and it's like, what do the kids say? We have fun, different from usual revision and reading for examinations. The library's good, it's noisy, but we don't mind that. Reading books helps us with spelling and helps us answer questions. Coming to the library is helping us at school. I like the new books, drawing and activities in the library. Soft couches are nice for reading. Pictures on the wall are interesting. I like everything in the library. It's great. Sometimes this place is the only place that these kids have with a desk and a chair. At home they might live in a very small house which has minimal furniture, if any. They can come here and they can study. Hopefully there's a bit of light. They can work on into the night and when it gets dark, which doesn't quite early in most parts of Africa. So it's had a massive impact. And the training, you know, the librarians we've trained have reported back time and again how much more confident they feel working with children and running their libraries. Last week we had a group of them organising some activities for children and they loved it. They spent their evening cutting up bits of paper, writing letters, making books, planning how they were going to work with the kids the next day. So we try and make the workshops a blend of some theory, helping people understand how children learn to read and how they can support that early literacy, and some practical activities such as making resources and actually running an activity with a big group of children. Also, the public libraries, it's every age, it's from tiny ones up to your teenagers. They all require a different way of working with them. So we're trying to just make people feel confident that they can handle the babies and the stroppy teenagers when they come into the library. And it seems to be working. Before the training, I wasn't comfortable working with children. Now I feel more confident. I could tell stories, sing songs. People didn't realise that they could sing in the library. You know, it's still a very traditional way of approaching the library, that it's somewhere you come and sit in silence. But not for children. It's somewhere where you come and you have fun, you make noise, and they love it. The librarians love it. Library is the people's university. We hear this time and time again. And especially the public libraries, where they've got a range of books, from our children's books to our higher education books to our even postgraduate level books. People can come there and read those books. They don't have to be at university, which can cost a lot of money. So they're feeling very positive in Kenya, Tanzania and Uganda about this particular program. So the kids are coming in and it's pretty successful. So what's next? We're working on, I've got 6 libraries going in Uganda at the moment, 1 in Namibia and a few in Kenya. But we're now looking in Kenya at the digital world. It's something people ask us a lot about, the book trade, and you're donating books. What about digital books? It's a really complex, complicated area that I don't begin to understand. However, we were lucky enough to get a grant for the next 2 years to work with the Kenya National Library Service on piloting the use of tablets in libraries to support literacy and learning. Now, it started off as a kind of e-learning project, and nobody really knew, well, what does e-learning mean? It can mean all sorts of things. So after lots of discussions, identification of some additional partners to work in, what would be the best digital device to use? Should it be laptop? Should it be PC? Should it be Kindles or other e-book readers, or should it be tablets? And after lots of consultation, we decided to try tablets and see how does that work. We're lucky enough to have got on board, as well as the Kenya National Library Service, a company called ILIMU, and that ILIMU in Swahili is teacher. They're an educational kind of IT company, and they're going to be they provide a platform and they provide the content, and they've managed to get hold of digitized Kenyan curriculum material and some other supporting material that they will support us with. They'll load it up onto the tablets. If we're lucky enough to source other digital content from other places, they will also help us get that content onto the tablets. And we're going to run this pilot this year in 1 library and see how does it work. Because there are all sorts of issues, as you can imagine. We're going to, it's 30 tablets to start with. What will happen? Are they going to break? Is there going to be sufficient electricity supply? Can the kids use them? Can the librarians use them? Can we charge them up in time? Are they going to mess it all up? It's a pilot. We're going to see what happens. Based on what happens this year, we're going to roll it out to 2 more libraries in Kenya. 1 up in quite a remote area, and another one in another more rural area. And both the librarians and the children will receive training from the staff of ILIMU on how to use the tablets. So it's uncharted territory for us, and we're really hoping that it may pave the way for how we can engage with the digital world in our work in in an appropriate, in a way that's appropriate for Africa. We're not going to ignore the printed book because we all know that massive demand for printed books. So I can talk a little bit more about that later if you're interested, but it just unfolds. Every month there's something new that comes up with this project that we're kind of fascinated with. We also work with schools, and we mentioned earlier book boxes. This has been quite a successful program. Again, going from the high tech of Kenya to